Have you ever had one of those moments where reality feels like a perfectly scripted revenge scene from a movie? That's exactly how I felt standing in that luxury restaurant, watching Lauren's smug smile fade as she realized her worst nightmare. The 30K nobody she'd been mocking for months was about to become her new boss. The elegant chandelier light caught Lauren's champagne glass mid-toast, her voice carrying across Morton's steakhouse with practiced precision. "To success," she announced to our gathered colleagues, her designer blazer catching the light just so, "and to knowing your worth." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her eyes locked with mine for a fraction of a second, that familiar smirk playing across her lips. I knew what was coming next. "Speaking of worth," she continued, swirling her champagne with theatrical flair, "Liam here reminded me of something absolutely hilarious today. Did you know our dear Howard in IT still makes just $30,000 a year?" The table fell. Silent, but Lauren was just warming up. She'd been building to this moment all evening, ever since our company announced the upcoming merger. I sat there, my water glass halfway to my lips, watching the scene unfold like a spectator in my own life. Lauren had no idea that in exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds, her entire world would implode. The inheritance paperwork in my briefcase felt like it was burning a hole through the leather. "I mean, honestly," Lauren continued, her voice dripping with false concern, "how do you even survive on that, Howard? Do you sleep in the server room? Is that why you're always at the office so early?" A few nervous chuckles rippled around the table. Tom, our HR director, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Elizabeth from marketing suddenly found her salad fascinating. I could have stopped her there, could have pulled out the documents that would silence her forever. But something in me wanted to let this play out. Maybe it was all those months of enduring her subtle jabs, her condescending smiles, her way of leaving printouts of better-paying jobs on my desk as if she was doing me a favor. You know what I love most about Howard? Lauren was on a roll now, her third glass of champagne fueling her cruelty. He's like this company's own little charity case, always wearing the same 2 dress shirts, bringing lunch from home in those sad plastic containers. It's almost inspiring, really, how he manages. "Miss Reynolds?" A voice interrupted from behind us. The maitre d' stood there, impossibly straight in his pressed black suit. "There's a call for you at the front desk. They say it's urgent. Something about the merger." Lauren's face lit up. This was the call she'd been waiting for. The one that would confirm her promotion to Chief Marketing Officer after the merger. She excused herself, practically floating toward the front desk, leaving behind the lingering echo of her mockery. I used the moment to reach down for my briefcase, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Inside was a letter from my late Uncle Glenn's lawyers, along with official documentation of my inheritance. 8.5 million, plus controlling shares in Reynolds and Blake Marketing, the very company that was acquiring us. The truth was, I'd known about the inheritance for 3 weeks. Uncle Glenn had always been the black sheep of the family, disappearing for years at a time on his adventures. What nobody knew was that he'd built an empire in silence, and for some reason I still couldn't fully understand, he'd left everything. To me, his only nephew, who'd never asked him for a thing. I could hear Lauren's heels clicking back toward our table, her pace quickening with each step. When she emerged from behind the wine rack, her face had lost all color. Behind her came Mr. Blake himself, the CEO of Reynolds and Blake, looking somber in his tailored suit. "Howard," he said, nodding in my direction. "I see you're already here. Good. I believe we have some business to discuss." He gestured to the empty seat beside me, completely ignoring Lauren's attempts to catch his eye. The table had gone deadly quiet. Lauren stood frozen, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the back of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. The inheritance letter made a satisfying sound as I pulled it from my briefcase, along with the merger documents showing exactly who now held controlling interest in Reynolds and Blake marketing. "Actually," I said, rising slowly to my feet, my voice steady and clear, "I believe Miss Reynolds was just giving us a fascinating lesson about worth." I turned to face her directly, watching as understanding slowly dawned in her eyes. "Please, Lauren, do continue. I'm particularly interested in your thoughts on charity cases who bring lunch from home." The chandelier light caught her face just right, illuminating every micro-expression of horror as she realized that the man she'd been mocking, the 30K nobody she treated like dirt, was about to become her boss. Sometimes life really does write the perfect revenge scene, but this moment, this was just the beginning of a story that would change everything, not just for Lauren, but for everyone at that table. Because while she saw me as nothing but a salary figure, she was about to learn that true worth isn't measured by the size of your paycheck, but by the strength of your character. And I was about to give her one hell of a lesson in both. The silence that followed felt thick enough to cut with a knife. I remained standing, watching as Lauren's perfect facade cracked like thin ice under too much weight. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but for once in her life, she had absolutely nothing to say. The irony wasn't lost on me. I loosened my tie slightly, feeling the weight of every eye in our section of Mortons fixed on this unfolding drama. The expensive wood-paneled walls that had seemed so intimidating when I walked in now felt like the perfect backdrop for this moment of reckoning. To think I'd actually hesitated about coming tonight, had nearly called in sick to avoid another evening of Lauren's subtle digs and not-so-subtle reminders of my place in the corporate hierarchy. "Howard," Mr. Blake's voice cut through the tension. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private." He gestured toward a secluded area of the restaurant where several private dining rooms offered refuge from prying eyes. But I wasn't quite ready to move. "Not yet." "With all due respect, sir," I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "I think right here is perfect." I turned to address our colleagues who sat frozen in various states of shock and disbelief. After all, Lauren has always been so passionate about discussing salaries and worth in public. It would be a shame to break with tradition now. A small, choking sound escaped from Lauren's throat. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the rapid shift of color in her face, from ghost white to burning red and back again. Tom from HR was suddenly very interested in his water glass, while Elizabeth's fork hovered halfway to her mouth, her salad forgotten. I was just... Lauren started, her voice uncharacteristically small. "Just what?" I asked, allowing myself to lean slightly against the table, adopting the casual pose she so often used when delivering her verbal jabs. "Just sharing your wisdom about financial worth? Just expressing concern for my modest lifestyle? Please don't stop on my account. I'm particularly interested in hearing more about those sad plastic containers I bring my lunch in." Liam, who had always been quick to laugh at Lauren's jokes, suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. The weight of the inheritance papers in my hand felt like a sword of Damocles, and I was finally ready to let it fall. "Mr. Howard," Mr. Blake tried again, his own discomfort evident. "The merger documents are right here," I finished for him, finally laying the papers on the table, along with some interesting information about the new ownership structure of Reynolds and Blake Marketing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I slid the inheritance letter forward, watching as Lauren's eyes darted to the numbers. Her sharp intake of breath was audible. The thing about moments like these is that they never feel quite like you imagine they will. In my head, during all those nights lying awake after particularly humiliating days at the office, I'd pictured something more vindictive. I'd imagined myself throwing the inheritance in Lauren's face, maybe even firing her on the spot. But standing there, watching her world crumble, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Not because she didn't deserve this moment of reckoning, God knows she'd earned every second of it, but because I suddenly saw her for what she was. Someone so desperately insecure that she'd built her entire identity around the ability to make others feel small. I stepped back from the table, straightening my off-the-rack suit jacket. You know what the funny thing is, Lauren? All those times you mocked my salary, my clothes, my lunch containers, I could have ended it with a single phone call. But I wanted to understand. Understand. What? She whispered, her fingers white-knuckled around her chair. What makes someone so obsessed with other people's worth that they forget to work on their own? The words came out softer than I'd intended, but they hit their mark. Lauren flinched as if I'd shouted. Mr. Blake cleared his throat, clearly trying. To salvage some semblance of professional decorum, perhaps we should all take a moment to— You're right, I interrupted, finally ready to move this conversation somewhere more private. But before we do, I want to make something clear to everyone at this table. I looked around at my colleagues, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. My salary never defined my worth, neither will this inheritance. Remember that the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on their paycheck. As I gathered my papers and prepared to follow Mr. Blake to the private dining room, I paused beside Lauren. Oh, and about those plastic containers. They're called being environmentally conscious, something you might want to look into. I hear it's important to young executives these days. The walk to the private dining room felt surreal, like I was floating above myself, watching this scene play out in a movie. Behind me, I could hear the excited whispers beginning, the rustle of movement as people processed what they'd just witnessed. But it was the sound of Lauren's designer heels clicking rapidly toward the ladies' room that told me everything I needed to know about the impact of this moment. Inside the private room, with its rich burgundy walls and soft lighting, I finally allowed myself to exhale. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a curious mix of satisfaction and something else. Not regret, exactly, but an awareness that this was just the beginning of a much longer journey. Mr. Blake settled into one of the plush chairs, his expression a mixture of respect and calculation. Well, he said, straightening his tie, that was quite an entrance into upper management. I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine releasing sound that seemed to break the last of the tension. Not exactly how I planned to start my executive career, I admitted, taking the seat across from him. No, he agreed, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth, but something tells me you're going to bring exactly the kind of change this company needs. He leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Though I hope you understand, with great power comes great responsibility, I finished for him. Don't worry, Mr. Blake. I learned more from earning $30,000 a year than Lauren ever did from making six figures. Those lessons won't go to waste. As we began discussing the details of the merger and my new role, I couldn't help but think about the plastic containers sitting in my apartment fridge, packed with tomorrow's lunch. Maybe I'd keep bringing them to work, even after all this. After all, some habits are worth keeping, no matter how much money you have in the bank. Looking back now, I can pinpoint exactly when Lauren first decided I was beneath her. It wasn't when she discovered my salary. That came later. No, it was during her first week at the company, 3 years ago, when she caught me helping the janitor, Aubrey, clean up a coffee spill in the break room. I remember the way she stood, in the doorway, designer handbag dangling from her forearm, watching me on my hands and knees with a roll of paper towels. "You know we have maintenance staff for that, right?" she'd said, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd come to know. Well, the one that suggested she was witnessing something both amusing and slightly distasteful. Aubrey's got enough on her plate. I'd replied, not bothering to look up. Besides, it was my coffee. What I didn't tell Lauren was that Aubrey had been fighting cancer for the past year, and some days even the simplest tasks left her exhausted. But people like Lauren didn't care about stories like that. They saw the world in simple terms, those above and those below. That moment set the tone for our entire relationship. Lauren, fresh from her MBA at an elite business school, saw the world as a ladder to be climbed. And in her mind, anyone who stopped to help others up was simply revealing their own weakness, their lack of ambition. The salary revelation came about 6 months later. Someone in HR, probably Tom, who could never keep his mouth shut after a few drinks, let slip that I was making just $30,000 a year. The news spread through the office like wildfire, and suddenly I became Lauren's favorite subject of ridicule. At first it was subtle. She'd leave printouts of job listings on my desk, all entry-level positions paying more than what I made. "Just trying to help," she'd say with that practiced smile when I caught her at it. Then came the comments in meetings, the little digs about budget constraints whenever I spoke up. "Well, we should probably get Howard's input," she'd say, her voice dripping with false consideration. "After all, he's our resident expert on frugal living." The room would titter with uncomfortable laughter, while I sat there, taking it all in, building my patience like layers of steel. What Lauren never bothered to find out was why I stayed at a job paying so little. She never asked about the startup I was building in my free time, or why I chose IT support when I had a master's degree in computer science. She certainly never knew about Uncle Glenn, or the long talks we'd had about the difference between making a living and making a life. Glenn had been different from the rest of my family. While my parents pushed for prestigious jobs and status symbols, Glenn traveled the world, starting businesses, helping local communities set up sustainable technologies. "Money's just a tool, Howard," he'd tell me during our late-night video calls. "It's what you do with it that matters." The last time I saw him was 2 years ago, during one of his rare visits home. He'd shown up at my tiny apartment unannounced. Looking tanned and weathered from his latest venture in South America, I'd just started my job at the company, and when I told him about the salary, he didn't flinch. "You took that job because of Aubrey, didn't you?" he'd asked, seeing right. Through me as usual, I nodded. The company's health insurance was exceptional, and when I'd learned about Aubrey's situation during my interview, I knew I had to find a way to help. The position was below my qualifications, but it allowed me to work flexible hours, help countless people with their tech issues, and still have time for my own projects. Glenn had smiled, that knowing look in his eyes that I'd never quite understood until now. "You're a lot like me, kid," he'd said. "You understand that wealth isn't always about what's in your bank account." He died 6 months later in a small village in Peru, where he'd been helping set up a solar power grid. The locals honored him with a ceremony that celebrated his generosity and spirit. I attended via a shaky video call, watching as people whose lives he'd touched shared stories about the quiet American who gave so much and asked for so little. The inheritance came as a complete shock. Glenn had built an empire in silence, investing in sustainable technologies and community development projects across the globe. But what surprised me more than the money was the letter he'd left with his lawyers. "Howard," it read, "I've watched you choose kindness over status, purpose over profit. You understood what I learned too late in life, that true wealth comes from how you treat others, not how others treat you. Everything I've built is yours now. Use it wisely and remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person they never thought you could be." The irony of it all was that during those 3 years of Lauren's mockery, I was actually helping to develop a revolutionary cloud security system in my spare time. The $30,000 salary covered my basic needs, and every extra minute went into my project. Uncle Glenn's inheritance meant I could now scale it properly, invest in the right resources, and potentially transform the entire industry. But Lauren never saw any of that. She never noticed that despite my sad packed lunches, I always had time to help interns learn the ropes. She didn't see that while she was building her designer wardrobe, I was building relationships with every department, understanding their needs, solving their problems. She was so focused on the number in my paycheck that she missed everything else that made up who I was. Even Mr. Blake, who'd seemed so intimidating in his corner office at Reynolds and Blake, had seen something in me that Lauren missed. During the merger discussions, before anyone knew about the inheritance, he'd specifically asked about the IT guy who everyone relies on. He'd seen the value in someone who put people before profits. The thing about wearing the same two-dress shirts, about bringing lunch from home, about living simply. It wasn't about not having money. It was about understanding what really mattered. Uncle Glenn had taught me that, and now I had the chance to teach others. Starting with Lauren, who was about to learn that sometimes the biggest statements come from the quietest people. As I sat in that private dining room with Mr. Blake, discussing the future of the company, I couldn't help but think about Glenn's last words to me. "Don't let them change your heart, kid. Let your heart change them." Looking back, I realize that this inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about proving that success and kindness aren't mutually exclusive. And Lauren, she was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The weeks leading up to that fateful dinner at Morton's were a masterclass in emotional endurance. The merger announcement had sent the office into a frenzy, and Lauren's behavior had escalated from casual mockery to something approaching obsession. It was as if my very existence, my continued contentment with my modest salary, personally offended her. I sat at my desk one Monday morning, 3 weeks after receiving Uncle Glenn's inheritance letter, quietly working on a system upgrade while watching Lauren's increasingly desperate power plays unfold. She'd started wearing exclusively designer clothes to the office, as if her Gucci blazers and Louboutin heels could somehow secure her position in the post-merger company. "Howard," she called out, strutting past my desk with a stack of papers, "be a dear and make sure everyone's computers are ready for the big presentation next week. We wouldn't want any technical difficulties." She emphasized those last words with a smirk, making it clear that she viewed my role as nothing more than glorified tech support. What she didn't know was that I'd already been in confidential meetings with Mr. Blake about integrating my cloud security system into the merged company's infrastructure. The papers finalizing my inheritance and controlling stake in Reynolds and Blake were sitting in my lawyer's office, waiting for the perfect moment. Later that same day, I overheard Lauren in the break room, holding court with her usual audience. "I just don't understand how someone can lack ambition so completely," she was saying, stirring her organic tea with a silver spoon she'd brought from home. "I mean, have you seen his car? It's practically archaic." Elizabeth, always eager to curry favor with Lauren, chimed in. "Maybe he's just comfortable with mediocrity." The words were barely out of her mouth when Tom from HR walked in, causing an awkward shuffle as they tried to pretend they hadn't just been gossiping. What none of them knew was that my archaic Toyota had over 200,000 miles on it because I'd spent years driving across the country helping small non-profits set up their IT infrastructure for free. Each mile was a story of someone helped, a community supported, but people like Lauren only saw the scratched paint and dated model. The pressure really started mounting when Lauren launched her most ambitious attack yet. She'd somehow gotten wind that Reynolds and Blake was looking for fresh talent to lead their digital transformation efforts. In her mind, this was her chance to prove she was indispensable to the merged company. "Oh, Howard," she practically sang. One afternoon, dropping a thick report on my desk, I need you to compile all our department's technical data for the merger review. By tomorrow morning." She paused, examining her manicure. "Think you can handle that on your limited bandwidth?" I glanced at the clock. It was already 4:30 p.m. The amount of work she'd dropped would take anyone else all night. "I'll see what I can do," I replied calmly, knowing full well that I'd already prepared most of this documentation weeks ago at Mr. Blake's direct request. "Perfect." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "And while you're at it, maybe update your resume. I hear there might be some restructuring after the merger. Wouldn't want you stuck at that salary forever." She turned to leave, then paused. "Though I suppose some people just aren't meant for bigger things." That night, as I sat in my modest apartment reviewing the final inheritance paperwork, I could hear Uncle Glenn's voice in my head. "Patience is the highest form of power, kid." He'd told me that once while we were fixing an old computer for a community center. People who rush to show their hand usually end up losing the game. The next morning, I arrived early as usual, the completed report on Lauren's desk before she arrived. What she didn't realize was that I'd included detailed proposals for technological innovations that would save the merged company millions. Innovations I'd been quietly developing for years. The look on her face when she skimmed the report was priceless. "How did you—" she started, then caught herself. "Well, I suppose even a broken clock is right twice a day." But I could see the worry in her eyes. For the first time, she was realizing there might be more to me than my salary suggested. That's when Lauren's tactics changed. She began trying to take credit for my ideas, presenting my innovations as her own in meetings. As I was explaining to Howard earlier, she'd say, outlining concepts she'd barely understood from my report. "We need to think bigger about our digital infrastructure." The tension in the office was becoming unbearable. Even Liam, who usually played both sides, started avoiding Lauren's increasingly frantic attempts to consolidate her power. She'd begun dropping hints about her connections at Reynolds and Blake, about private conversations with executives that I knew hadn't happened. "I just feel sorry for him," I overheard her telling Elizabeth one day. "Once the merger goes through, there won't be room for his kind of thinking. Business is business after all." The irony of her words, given what I knew about the merger, almost made me break my silence right then. But I remembered Uncle Glenn's last piece of advice. The best lessons are the ones people learn for themselves. So I waited, watched, and prepared. I kept helping Aubrey with her cleaning when she needed it, kept bringing my lunch in those sad plastic containers, kept driving my high-mileage Toyota. Each day, Lauren's behavior became more erratic. The merger was approaching, and her desperate grasp for power was becoming obvious to everyone. She started scheduling unnecessary meetings, sending emails at all hours, trying to prove her indispensability. The dinner at Morton's was her idea, a team celebration that was really just another opportunity for her to showcase her perceived superiority. She'd chosen the most expensive restaurant in town, knowing some of us would struggle with the bill. It was her way of reinforcing the hierarchy she'd created in her mind. What she didn't know was that she'd actually chosen the perfect stage for her own humbling. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor that way. As I prepared for that dinner, carefully packing the inheritance and merger documents into my briefcase, I thought about how different things would be tomorrow. But first, Lauren needed to learn one final lesson about judging books by their covers, or in this case, judging people by their salaries. Morton's steakhouse buzzed with the quiet energy of power lunches and business deals, but at our table, the atmosphere was charged with something else entirely. Lauren had just finished her speech about my salary, and Mr. Blake had arrived at the perfect moment. Now, watching her face transform from smug superiority to dawning horror, I felt an odd sense of calm wash over me. "Howard," Mr. Blake said again, settling into his chair. Perhaps now would be a good time to discuss the future of our digital infrastructure. He pulled out a leather portfolio, deliberately placing it on the table. Lauren's eyes darted between us, her perfectly manicured nails drumming an anxious rhythm on her water glass. Yes, I replied, matching his professional tone. And maybe we should also address the proposed changes to the ownership structure. At the word ownership, Lauren's hand froze mid-tap. The rest of our colleagues sat in stunned silence, their expensive entrees forgotten. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew 2 sets of documents. The first was my inheritance paperwork, showing the full scope of Uncle Glenn's legacy, 8.5 million in liquid assets, plus controlling interest in Reynolds and Blake marketing. The second was my comprehensive proposal for revolutionizing the company's technological infrastructure, the very one Lauren had tried to claim as her own. Chetty, me make sure I understand this correctly, Lauren interrupted, her voice higher than usual. You're saying that this whole time... She couldn't even finish the sentence. The cognitive dissonance was clearly short-circuiting her worldview. What I'm saying, Lauren, I replied calmly, is that while you were busy mocking my salary and my lunch containers, I was developing the systems that will save this company millions in operational costs. And now, as majority shareholder, I'll be overseeing their implementation personally. The silence that followed was deafening. Elizabeth's fork clattered against her plate, making everyone jump. Tom from HR looked like he might need HR himself. But it was Liam's expression that struck me most, a mixture of respect and embarrassment for his role in Lauren's previous mockery. This is impossible, Lauren finally managed, her composure cracking. You're the IT guy, the 30K nobody who what, Lauren? I asked, letting each word land deliberately. Who helped every person in this room at some point? Who built the security protocols that protected our client data? Who spotted a vulnerability in our system that could have cost us millions in lawsuits? Mr. Blake nodded, adding his authority to my words. Howard's been instrumental in preparing for this merger, though few knew it. His cloud security innovations alone are worth more than most companies' entire IT budgets. Lauren's face went through a fascinating series of transformations: disbelief, anger, calculation, and finally, something approaching panic. But why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why pretend to be... Why let you? Mock me? I finished for her. Treat me like I was beneath you? Judge my worth by my salary? I leaned back, letting the weight of the moment settle. Because, Lauren, you showed me exactly who you were. Every snide comment, every condescending email, every time you tried to take credit for someone else's work. You were writing your own performance review. The truth hit her like a physical blow. She'd spent months documenting her own unprofessional behavior, thinking she was secure in her position of power. Now, those same actions would be viewed through an entirely different lens. Mr. Howard, Mr. Blake interjected, has already shared some concerning interactions with HR. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, no doubt remembering all the times he'd witnessed Lauren's behavior and done nothing. But Lauren started, then stopped, seemingly realizing there was no defense for her actions. The expensive wine in her glass had lost its appeal, sitting untouched as reality sank in. You know what the most interesting part is? I continued, my voice level. At any point, you could have asked me about my work. You could have shown genuine interest in what I was developing, in why I chose this job, in what I was building. Instead, you assumed that salary equals value. That's a dangerous equation, Lauren. The rest of the table sat in rapt attention, watching this reversal of fortune play out. Elizabeth had stopped pretending to eat her salad. Liam looked like he wanted to disappear into his expensive suit. Your future at the company isn't in jeopardy because of my inheritance or my new position, I explained, watching understanding, a dawn in her eyes. It's in jeopardy because you've demonstrated consistently and thoroughly that you don't understand the real meaning of value. Mr. Blake cleared his throat. The merger announcement tomorrow will include some significant reorganization. Details. Howard will be taking on the role of Chief Technology Officer with additional oversight of company culture and professional development. Lauren's wineglass trembled slightly in her hand. Professional development? Yes, I confirmed, allowing myself a small smile. I'll be implementing a new training program focused on workplace respect, collaborative innovation, and I paused for effect. Understanding the true measure of professional worth. The irony was clearly not lost on anyone at the table. Lauren's previous comments about my worth hung in the air like invisible witnesses to her downfall. Now, I said, gathering my documents, I believe we should discuss the future of our digital infrastructure. Unless anyone else has comments about salary figures they'd like to share, the silence that followed was answer enough. Lauren stared into her wineglass as if it might contain an escape route, while our colleagues tried to process this dramatic shift in the office hierarchy. As Mr. Blake and I stood to move to a private table, I paused beside Lauren's chair. Oh, and Lauren, those plastic containers you found so amusing, they're part of a zero-waste initiative I'm planning to implement company-wide. I trust you'll be enthusiastic about participating. Walking away from that table, I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure, only a quiet satisfaction that sometimes justice arrives in its own time, served on a plate of humble pie at Morton's steakhouse. The private dining room at Morton's felt like a war room as Mr. Blake and I settled in to discuss the future of Reynolds and Blake marketing. The mahogany walls seemed to absorb the tension from the main dining area, creating a space where real decisions could be made. I loosened my tie slightly, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. Well, Mr. Blake said, pouring us both a glass of water, that was quite a revelation out there, though I suspect it won't be the last shock Lauren experiences this week. He raised an eyebrow, clearly curious about how I planned to handle the transition. I took a moment to organize my thoughts, remembering Uncle Glenn's words about power and responsibility. The company needs a culture change, I began, pulling out my detailed proposal. Not just technological updates, but a fundamental shift in how we value our employees. Mr. Blake nodded, his expression thoughtful. And Lauren, what are your plans? It was the question I'd been wrestling with since receiving the inheritance. The easy path would be to fire her immediately, to give her a taste of the professional uncertainty she'd so often lorded over others. But Uncle Glenn hadn't built his empire by taking the easy path. I'm not going to fire her, I said finally, watching surprise flicker across Mr. Blake's face. At least, not immediately. Lauren's going to become an object lesson in professional development. Explain, he said, leaning forward with interest. I spread out several documents on the table, organizational charts, project proposals, and training programs I'd been developing in secret. Lauren's greatest skill is her ability to identify people's insecurities and exploit them. We're going to channel that insight into something constructive. The plan was comprehensive. First, Lauren would be reassigned to lead a new initiative focused on employee engagement and professional growth. Her salary would remain the same, but her new role would require her to work directly with the people she'd previously looked down on. She'll have to shadow different departments, I explained, pointing to a detailed schedule. Spend time understanding what each person contributes, regardless of their pay grade, including a week with Aubrey in maintenance. Mr. Blake's eyebrows shot up. The janitor she complained about to HR? The same, I confirmed. Aubrey has more wisdom about workplace dynamics than most MBAs I know, and she's beaten cancer twice while supporting 3 kids on a modest salary. Lauren could learn a lot from her. The second phase of the plan involved Lauren, helping to implement the Zero Waste Initiative, the very program she'd mocked me for with my reusable containers. She'd be responsible for helping employees transition away from disposable products, teaching them about sustainability and cost-effectiveness. "It's either adapt or resign," I said, taking a sip of water. "But if she resigns, she'll be walking away from one of the most innovative transformations in corporate culture. Her choice." Mr. Blake studied the proposals, his expression moving, from skepticism to understanding. "You're not punishing her," he realized. "You're giving her a chance to reinvent herself." "Exactly," I nodded. "Uncle Glenn taught me that true change doesn't come from humiliation. It comes from understanding. Lauren needs to understand the value of every person in that office, from the CEO to the night cleaning staff." We spent the next hour diving into the technical aspects of the merger. My cloud security system would be implemented company-wide, but with a twist. Every department would have input on how it could better serve their needs. No more top-down decisions without consulting the people actually doing the work. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out a final document. "I want to implement a profit-sharing program for all employees, regardless of position. When the company succeeds, everyone should benefit." Mr. Blake whistled low. "That's progressive." "It's practical," I corrected. "Happy employees are productive employees, and nothing makes people happier than knowing their work is valued, something Lauren's about to learn firsthand." As we wrapped up the meeting, I could still hear the murmur of voices from the main dining room. No doubt the story of tonight's revelation was already spreading through the office grapevine. Tomorrow would bring a different kind of challenge, facing the entire company as their new leader. "One last thing," Mr. Blake said as we stood to leave. "Why did you wait? You could have shut Lauren down months ago." I thought about all the late nights in the office, the overheard conversations, the subtle and not so subtle jabs. Because sometimes the best way to understand a broken system is to experience it from the bottom. Lauren showed me exactly what needed to change in our company culture. Walking back through the restaurant, I caught glimpses of our colleagues still processing the evening's events. Elizabeth was furiously typing on her phone, probably updating her LinkedIn profile. Tom looked like he was mentally reviewing every HR complaint he'd ignored. And Lauren sat alone at the bar, staring into a fresh glass of wine. For a moment, our eyes met. The hostility in her gaze had been replaced by something else: uncertainty, fear, maybe even a glimmer of respect. I gave her a small nod as I passed. Tomorrow would be day one of her new education in professional worth. Outside in the parking lot, my old Toyota sat among the luxury vehicles, wearing its scratches and dents like badges of honor. Each mark told a story of service, of choosing. Purpose over prestige. I had no plans to replace it, even with my newfound wealth. Some things were worth more than their monetary value. Another lesson Lauren would soon learn. As I drove home that night, I thought about Uncle Glenn and what he'd say about all this. He'd probably laugh, slap me on the back, and remind me that the true test of character isn't how you handle being at the bottom. It's how you behave when you reach the top. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, I had a company to rebuild and a point to prove that sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. The morning after the Morton's revelation dawned bright and clear. I arrived at the office early, as usual, but today felt different. My familiar Toyota looked oddly at home among the luxury cars in the executive parking section, a visual reminder that change was coming. The security guard, Mary, did a double-take. As I pulled into the CEO space Mr. Blake had insisted I use. "Mr. Howard?" she called out, confusion evident in her voice. "I think there might be a mix-up with the parking." "No mix-up, Mary," I replied, grabbing my briefcase, the same worn leather one I'd always carried. But since you mention it, how do you feel about the current parking situation? I've noticed the staff spots flood during heavy rain. Her eyes widened slightly. In 15 years of working security, I doubted anyone from management had ever asked her opinion on anything. Well, yes, actually. The drainage is terrible on that side of the lot. Write up a proposal for improvements, I said, pulling out one of my sad plastic containers that held my lunch. Have it on my desk by end of week. We'll fix it. The lobby was buzzing with energy as I walked in. News of last night's events had clearly spread like wildfire. Elizabeth was huddled with a group from marketing, their whispered conversation dying the moment they spotted me. Tom from HR looked like he hadn't slept, his tie askew as he rushed toward his office clutching a stack of files, probably reviewing all those complaints about Lauren he'd ignored. I made my way to my old desk, in the IT department first. It felt important somehow to start this new chapter from where the old one began. As I settled into my familiar chair, I heard the distinct click of designer heels approaching. Howard. Lauren's voice was controlled, professional. A stark contrast to her usual condescending tone. Do you have a moment to discuss my position with the company? I looked up, taking in her appearance. She'd clearly put extra effort into looking executive-ready today. Perfect makeup, immaculate suit, not a hair out of place. But her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. Actually, I replied, standing slowly, I do, but not here. I gestured toward the conference room. Shall we? The walk to the conference room felt like a procession, with every eye in the office tracking our movement. Lauren held her head high, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. As we entered the room, she immediately took her usual power position at the head of the table. Actually, I said, not unkindly, I think you'll find that's my seat now. The color rose in her cheeks as she moved to a side chair. Small victories, as Uncle Glenn would say, often reveal the biggest truths. Lauren, I began, settling into the chair she'd vacated. Before you present whatever carefully rehearsed speech you've prepared, I want you to look at something. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. What's this? She asked, her manicured fingers hovering over the manila envelope. Every email, every comment, every instance of workplace bullying you've engaged in over the past 3 years. I watched as she flipped through the pages, her face growing paler. And before you say anything, yes, I kept receipts. All of them. She started, then stopped, visibly recalculating her approach. I assume this is your way of firing me. Actually, no. I allowed that to sink in for a moment. This is my way of showing you exactly why you're being reassigned to the new Employee Engagement and Professional Development Division. Her head snapped up. I'm being what? You have a remarkable ability to identify people's insecurities and status markers, I explained, leaning forward. You've spent years categorizing people by their salaries, their clothes, their possessions. Now you're going to use that same observational skill to help people grow. You can't be serious, she whispered, but there was something else in her voice now. A hint of intrigue beneath the indignation. Dead serious. Starting Monday, you'll begin shadowing different departments, learning what each person contributes, regardless of their pay grade. Your first week will be with Aubrey in maintenance. The janitor? Lauren's voice rose an octave. You expect me to... I expect you to learn what I learned, I cut in firmly, that every person in this building contributes to our success. That salary doesn't equal worth. That true leadership isn't about pushing people down. It's about lifting them up. I pulled out another document, her new job description. You'll maintain your current salary, I continued, watching relief flash across her face. But Bonuses will be tied to measurable improvements in employee satisfaction and development. In other words, Lauren, your success will depend on helping others succeed. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the papers in front of her. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, calculating odds, weighing options. And if I refuse, then you're welcome to resign, I replied calmly. But consider this, which looks better on a resume, quitting because you couldn't handle no longer being the office bully or pioneering a revolutionary corporate culture program. A knock at the door interrupted us. Mr. Blake entered, followed by several board members. "Ah, good," he said, taking in the scene. "I see you're already implementing changes." Lauren stood quickly, smoothing her skirt. "Mr. Blake, I was just reviewing her new role in our corporate restructuring," I finished for her. In fact, Lauren was about to share some initial thoughts on employee engagement strategies. Weren't you, Lauren? Our eyes met across the table. This was her first test. Adapt or break. To her credit, she straightened her shoulders and turned to face the board. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I believe there are several areas where we can improve workplace cohesion and professional development." As she launched into an impromptu presentation, I sat back and watched. Uncle Glenn had always said that people will surprise you if you give them the chance to be better than they think they are. The meeting wrapped up 30 minutes later, with the board members nodding approvingly at Lauren's unexpected enthusiasm. For corporate culture reform, as everyone filed out, she lingered behind. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why give me another chance?" I stood gathering my papers. "Because 3 years ago, someone gave me a chance when they hired me at a salary far below my worth. That decision changed lives, saved jobs, and ultimately led to this moment. Everyone deserves the opportunity to be more than their worst behaviors." Walking out of that conference room, I could feel the wheels of change already in motion. The old power structure was crumbling, and from its ruins, something better would grow. Lauren's transformation would be just the beginning. After all, sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy is to turn them into an ally. The company-wide meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in our largest conference room. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, some anxious, some curious, all attentive, I couldn't help but think about how different this same room had felt just a few months ago when Lauren had presented her last marketing strategy, openly mocking my suggestions about digital security. Mr. Blake stood to my right, ready to make the official announcement. Lauren sat in the front row, her posture perfect, but her usual confidence replaced by something more contemplative. The inheritance paperwork and merger documents lay neatly arranged on the podium before me. "Good morning, everyone," Mr. Blake began, his voice carrying authority that immediately hushed the murmuring crowd. "As you know, the merger between our company and Reynolds and Blake Marketing has been the subject of much speculation. Today, we're here to announce some significant changes." I watched the room's reaction as Mr. Blake continued. "First, I'd like to introduce you to our new majority shareholder and Chief Technology Officer, Howard Mitchell." The silence that followed was deafening. In the back, I could see Tom from HR nearly choke on his coffee. Elizabeth's jaw literally dropped, while Liam seemed suddenly fascinated by his shoes. "Some of you," I began, stepping forward, "know me as the IT guy who makes $30,000 a year. Others know me as the person who fixed their computer or helped with technical issues or brought lunch in reusable containers." My eyes met Lauren's briefly. "Today, I want you to know me as someone who believes in the potential of every person in this room." I laid out my vision for the company: the cloud security system implementation, the zero waste initiative, the profit-sharing program. With each announcement, I could see the shock on people's faces, transforming into something else: hope. "But perhaps the most important change," I continued, "will be in how we value each other. Starting today, we're implementing a new employee engagement and professional development program, and I'm pleased to announce that Lauren Reynolds will be leading this initiative." The collective gasp was audible. Lauren sat straighter, her chin lifting slightly as all eyes turned to her. "Miss Reynolds has demonstrated a remarkable ability to observe workplace dynamics," I said, allowing a small smile. "Now she'll be using those skills to help every employee reach their full potential." What happened next was unexpected. Lauren stood up, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "May I say something?" she asked, her voice carrying a note I'd never heard before. "Humility." I nodded, stepping back from the podium. "For years," she began, "I judged my colleagues, judged all of you, based on numbers in a paycheck. I looked down on people who brought lunch from home, who drove older cars, who didn't wear designer labels." She paused, taking a deep breath. I was wrong. The room was silent, hanging on every word from the woman who had once been the office's most notorious status. "Snob. Howard taught me something without saying a word," she continued. "He showed me that true worth isn't measured by a salary figure. It's measured by how you treat others, by the value you bring to your community, by the lives you touch." I could see tears in Aubrey's eyes as she watched from her seat near the door. The maintenance worker who Lauren had once complained about was now nodding in appreciation of her words. "I accept this new role," Lauren announced, "not as a demotion, but as an opportunity to right my wrongs, to help build the kind of workplace where everyone's contribution is valued, where success is measured by more than just numbers." The applause that followed was genuine, if somewhat tentative. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but the first steps were being taken. As the meeting continued, I outlined more specific changes. Improved parking facilities for all staff, enhanced healthcare benefits, educational support programs. With each announcement, I could see the reality sinking in. This wasn't just a change in leadership. It was a revolution in corporate culture. "Finally," I said, reaching the last item on my agenda, "I want to address something personal. This inheritance, this position, they don't change who I am. I'll still be bringing my lunch in reusable containers. I'll still be driving my Toyota, and I'll still be the person you can come to with your problems, technical or otherwise." Mr. Blake stepped forward again, adding his endorsement to the changes. But what really captured everyone's attention was what happened next. Lauren approached the podium, holding a familiar-looking container. "In that spirit," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I'd like to donate my entire collection of designer lunch containers to the office kitchen. And," she paused, a genuine smile replacing her usual smirk, "I'd like to learn more about that zero-waste initiative, starting today." The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had mocked my frugal habits was now publicly embracing them. It wasn't just about containers, it was about acknowledging that she had been wrong about what matters. As the meeting wrapped up, people began approaching with questions, ideas, and even apologies. Tom from HR looked particularly anxious to discuss updating our workplace conduct policies. Elizabeth hovered nearby, clearly reconsidering her previous allegiance to Lauren's mean girl attitude. But it was Aubrey who made the moment truly meaningful. She approached with tears in her eyes, pulling me into an unexpected hug. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." "We're all doing it," I corrected gently. "Every person in this room is part of this change." Looking out at the buzzing conference room, I could see the transformation beginning. Lauren was already engaged in conversation with some junior staff members, her usual condescension replaced by genuine interest. Mr. Blake was discussing implementation timelines with department heads. And throughout the room, people who had never interacted before were talking, sharing ideas, breaking down the invisible barriers that had divided us for so long. This was more than a breakthrough. It was a renaissance. Uncle Glenn would have loved it. He always said that true success isn't about reaching the top, it's about who you bring with you when you get there. As I gathered my papers, I noticed my reflection in the conference room window. I was still wearing one of my 2 dress shirts, still carrying my worn briefcase. But something had changed, not in my appearance, but in how others saw me, and more importantly, in how they saw themselves. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs aren't about what you gain, but about what you help others discover within themselves. The first week after the announcement was a whirlwind of transitions. My old desk in the IT department was packed up and moved to the executive floor, though not without some hesitation on my part. There was something symbolic about leaving that space where I'd spent so many hours being underestimated by Lauren and others. "You don't have to keep everything, you know," Elizabeth said, hovering nearby as I unpacked my modest belongings in the corner office. She'd appointed herself as an unofficial transition assistant, perhaps trying to distance herself from her former alliance with Lauren. We could order new furniture, something more executive. I placed my collection of programming books on the shelf, alongside the worn photo of Uncle Glenn and me fixing computers at the community center. "Actually," I replied, setting my reusable coffee mug on the desk, "I think this suits me just fine." The office itself was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city. But what I loved most was the small conference area I'd requested, a casual space with comfortable chairs where anyone could come discuss their ideas without the formality of a traditional meeting room. Lauren's transition was perhaps the most fascinating to watch. On her first day of shadowing Aubrey in maintenance, she'd shown up in Gucci loafers and a silk blouse. By lunchtime, she'd gone home to change into more practical attire. "You know," Aubrey told me later, a slight smile playing on her lips, "she's not half bad when she actually listens, asked some good questions about our workflow, even noticed some inefficiencies in our supply ordering system." The changes weren't just superficial. Every morning, I made a point of walking through different departments, talking with employees at all levels. It was during one of these walks that I overheard Lauren in the break room, having what seemed to be a genuine conversation with the intern she'd previously ignored. "No, seriously," she was saying, her designer handbag replaced by a practical tote. I had no idea how complex the maintenance scheduling system was. We could learn a lot from their organizational methods in marketing. Tom from HR was working overtime to implement new workplace conduct policies. I'd given him a clear mandate: create guidelines that valued respect and collaboration over hierarchy and status. "It's like building a whole new company culture," he said during one of our meetings, his enthusiasm evident. "But you know what? People are actually excited about it." The Zero Waste Initiative, once a source of mockery, was now gaining traction throughout the office. I'd arrived one morning to find the kitchens stocked with reusable containers, Lauren's donated collection, cleaned and relabeled for communal use. A sign above them read, "Worth isn't measured by the price tag, but by the impact we make." Even the parking situation was improving. Mary's proposal for better drainage in the staff parking area had been implemented immediately, and the arbitrary hierarchical parking assignments were abolished in favor of a more practical system that considered factors like arrival time and carpooling. But perhaps the most significant change came in the form of our first company-wide professional development meeting. Lauren had spent weeks preparing, working closely with Aubrey and other staff members she'd previously overlooked. "The thing is," she explained to the assembled employees, standing confidently at the podium where she'd once delivered very different messages, "we've been measuring success all wrong. It's not about individual achievement, it's about collective growth." I watched from the back of the room as she outlined her plans for peer mentoring, skill-sharing workshops, and what she called perspective exchanges, where employees would spend time learning about different departments' challenges and contributions. "Last month," she continued, her voice carrying a new kind of authority, one born of humility rather than arrogance. "I wouldn't have been able to tell you the first thing about maintaining our building systems efficiently. Now, thanks to Aubrey and her team, I understand that every role in this company is essential to our success." The transformation in Lauren wasn't just professional, it was personal. Gone was the sharp-edged woman who measured people by their salary. In her place was someone who had learned the hard way that true value couldn't be calculated in dollars. One afternoon, I found her sitting alone in the break room, staring at her reflection in the window. "You know," she said, not turning around, "I used to think I had it all figured out. Success was a number in your bank account. Status was about what you wore and where you lived." She paused, meeting my eyes in the reflection. "I've never been so happy to be wrong." The physical changes to the office were becoming visible too. The stark, competitive atmosphere was softening, replaced by collaborative spaces and areas designed for comfortable interaction. The break room, once a battlefield of status symbols with its designer coffee cups and expensive lunch containers, now sported a community board where employees shared tips on sustainable living and professional growth. Elizabeth, ever the weather vane of office culture, had completely transformed her approach. Gone were the sycophantic agreements with Lauren's previous behavior. Instead, she was actively engaging with junior staff, sharing her marketing expertise while learning from their fresh perspectives. "I never realized," she admitted during a team meeting, "how much creative potential we were wasting by maintaining those artificial barriers between departments and pay grades. Even my old Toyota had become something of a symbol." I'd overheard newer employees telling the story, how the CTO with an $8.5 million inheritance still drove his reliable old car, still brought lunch from home, still valued substance over style. Liam, who had once laughed at Lauren's jokes about my salary, now made a point of parking his luxury car in the regular lot rather than the executive section. "It's just a car," he'd said when someone commented on it. "What matters is what you do, not what you drive." The inheritance that had shocked everyone was being put to work in ways that honored Uncle Glenn's legacy. The first phase of our new profit-sharing program was implemented, ensuring that every employee, from the CEO to the newest intern, had a stake in the company's success. But the real changes weren't in the policies or the programs. They were in the small daily interactions that showed how deeply the transformation was taking root. It was in the way Lauren now held doors open for maintenance staff, in how Elizabeth mentored junior employees, in how Liam had started a carpooling program. 1 month after the announcement, I sat in my office, reviewing employee feedback forms. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, but one in particular caught my eye. It was from Lauren. "I used to think being at the top meant having power over others. Now I understand it's about having the power to lift others up. Thank you for teaching me that lesson." Sometimes the most profound changes start with a simple shift in perspective, or in this case, with a $30K salary and an 8.5-meter revelation. 3 months into my role as CTO and majority shareholder, the office had evolved into something Uncle Glenn would have been proud of. The physical changes were obvious. Gone were the stark cubicles and hierarchical office layouts, replaced by open collaborative spaces and comfortable meeting areas. But the real transformation ran much deeper. Lauren's evolution was perhaps the most remarkable. I found her one morning in the maintenance department, dressed in practical workwear, helping Aubrey's team troubleshoot a complex scheduling issue with the building's new energy-efficient systems. "You know," she said, looking up from the tablet, "they were reviewing. If you had told me 6 months ago that I'd be excited about organizing maintenance schedules and sustainability initiatives, I would have laughed in your face." She paused, a thoughtful expression crossing her features. Actually, I probably would have made a condescending remark about it first, then laughed. Aubrey, who was showing Lauren how to optimize the new system, chuckled. And I never thought I'd be teaching management strategies to our former marketing director. Life's funny that way. The employee engagement program Lauren had developed was becoming a model for other companies. She'd taken everything she'd learned from her time at the bottom, as she once would have called it, and transformed it into something revolutionary. Her understanding of human nature, once used to tear people down, now served to build them up. The thing about status, she explained during one of our leadership meetings, is that it's entirely artificial. I used to think my designer clothes and expensive car made me better than others. Now I realize they were just armor I wore to hide my own insecurities. Even her appearance had changed. The sharp designer suits were replaced by comfortable professional attire. Her pristine manicure gave way to practical, well-kept hands that weren't afraid of actual work. But the biggest change was in her eyes, the calculating coldness replaced by genuine warmth. Elizabeth, too, had undergone a transformation. Once Lauren's eager follower in workplace snobbery, she'd found her own voice as an advocate for junior employees. The marketing department, under her new leadership style, had become a hub of innovation where ideas were valued regardless of their source. "Remember when I used to spend my lunch breaks online shopping for status symbols?" she asked me one day as we reviewed proposals from her team. "Now I spend them mentoring our interns. And you know what? It feels so much better." Liam, who had once prided himself on having the most expensive car in the parking lot, now led our corporate responsibility initiatives. He'd taken the concept of my reusable containers and expanded it into a company-wide sustainability program that was saving us thousands while helping the environment. "You know what's ironic?" he said during a presentation of the program's success. "We're actually saving more money with these initiatives than we ever did trying to impress clients with expensive lunches and flashy presentations." The profit-sharing program was showing remarkable results. When everyone had a stake in the company's success, productivity soared, but more importantly, the sense of community strengthened. People weren't just working for a paycheck anymore. They were building something together. Tom from HR had evolved from a passive observer of workplace dynamics to an active advocate for positive change. His new conflict resolution program, based on understanding and empathy rather than hierarchy, had reduced workplace disputes by 70%. "It's amazing," he told me during our weekly check-in. "When you remove artificial status barriers, people actually communicate better." Who knew? The irony in his voice was matched by the genuine amazement in his eyes. Even Mr. Blake had evolved, though in subtler ways. I caught him one afternoon having lunch in the break room with a group of junior developers genuinely engaged in their ideas about improving our digital infrastructure. "You've changed this place," he said to me later. "Not just the business metrics, though those are impressive, but the soul of the company. It feels human." My own evolution was ongoing. The corner office remained simply furnished. My Toyota still occupied a regular parking spot, and my lunch still came in those same reusable containers. But I'd grown too, learning to balance leadership with humility, authority with accessibility. Uncle Glenn's inheritance had done more than just change the power structure. It had catalyzed a complete transformation in how we viewed success and worth. The security system I'd developed was now being implemented across multiple industries, but what made me proudest was how we'd developed it, collaboratively, with input from every level of the company. One day, I overheard a new employee asking Lauren about the legend of the 30K CTO who inherited millions. Lauren's response surprised me. "Howard taught us all something invaluable," she said, her voice carrying none of its former condescension. He showed us that your salary doesn't define your worth, your character does, and sometimes the most valuable people are the ones you've been taught to overlook. The employee handbook, once a dry document about dress codes and procedures, now opened with a simple statement. Worth is measured by impact, not income. Value is determined by contribution, not compensation. Looking out over the transformed office space from my simple corner office, I couldn't help but smile. Uncle Glenn had always said that money was just a tool. It was what you did with it that mattered. We'd used it to build something he would have loved, a workplace where everyone's contribution was valued, where success was measured in more than just dollars, and where the person bringing lunch in a reusable container might just be the one leading the company's next big innovation. The evolution wasn't just about changing how we worked. It was about changing how we saw each other and ourselves. And that, more than any inheritance, was the real breakthrough. 6 months into the company's transformation, an unexpected situation arose that would test everything we'd built. Reynolds and Blake's biggest competitor, Sterling Communications, had caught wind of our revolutionary workplace changes and the resulting surge in productivity. They made an aggressive move, attempting to poach our top talent with promises of enormous salaries and prestigious titles. Their first target, Lauren. I was in my office reviewing the latest employee satisfaction surveys when she knocked on my door, holding what I immediately recognized as an offer letter. Her expression was unreadable as she took a seat in one of the comfortable chairs. We'd added to my office's casual meeting area. Sterling Communications, she said without preamble, placing the letter on my desk. They're offering me triple my current salary, a corner office, and a team of 20 people. She paused, watching my reaction. They want me to implement our employee development program there. I picked up the letter, scanning the impressive figures. That's quite an offer. It is, Lauren agreed, then smiled, not her old calculating smile, but something genuine. And 6 months ago, I would have taken it without hesitation. Status, power, money. It was everything I used to dream about. But now, I prompted, already suspecting her answer but wanting to hear it from her. Now, she leaned back, gesturing around the office, at the reusable container holding my lunch, at the family photo of Uncle Glenn, at the simple but functional furniture. Now, I understand what real value looks like, and it's not about the size of the paycheck. Before we could discuss further, Tom from HR burst in, looking flustered. We've got a situation, he announced. Sterling's headhunters have approached half our department heads. They're offering astronomical salaries and... He trailed off, noticing Lauren's presence and the offer letter on my desk. And they want us to bring our new corporate culture to them, Lauren finished for him, for a price. I stood up, moving to the window that overlooked our transformed office space. Below, I could see Aubrey leading a training session for new maintenance staff, while Elizabeth collaborated with junior marketers in one of our open meeting areas. Liam was demonstrating our new sustainability initiatives to a group of visitors from another company. Call a company-wide meeting, I decided. This afternoon, main conference room. The news spread quickly. By the time we gathered in the conference room, everyone knew about Sterling's attempts to poach our talent. The tension in the room was palpable as I took my place at the podium, Lauren and the other department heads, seated in the front row. 6 months ago, I began, I stood here and told you that true worth isn't measured by a salary figure. Today, Sterling Communications is testing that belief. They're offering some of you double, triple, even quadruple your current salaries. I paused, looking around the room. They want to buy what we've built here. They think they can replicate our success by throwing money at it. But they're missing the point entirely. Lauren stood up, moving to join me at the podium. May I? She asked. At my nod, she turned to face our colleagues. When I started the employee engagement program, she said, I thought I was teaching others, but I was the one learning. What we've built here isn't just a program or a system, it's a community, one where the maintenance team's ideas are valued as much as the executives, where success is measured by impact, not income. Elizabeth raised her hand. Sterling offered me Chief Marketing Officer position, she announced. I turned them down this morning because here I'm not just a title or a salary, I'm part of something meaningful. One by one, others stood up sharing similar stories. Liam had declined an executive position. Tom had turned down a massive HR director role. Even Aubrey spoke up, revealing that Sterling had tried to recruit her to oversee their facilities management. They offered me more money than I've ever seen, Aubrey said, her voice strong. But they didn't understand. You can't buy the kind of respect we've built here. The room erupted in applause. When it quieted, Lauren spoke again, holding up her Sterling offer letter. 6 months ago, I judged people by their salaries. I mocked Howard for making $30,000 a year, never seeing the wealth of knowledge and character he possessed. She tore the letter in half. Today, I choose value over price tag. I choose us. Others followed suit, ripping up their offer letters. The sound of tearing paper filled the room like a symphony of defiance. Sterling Communications thinks they can buy our success, I said, watching the pieces of paper fall like confetti. But they don't understand what Uncle Glenn taught me years ago, that true worth isn't in your bank account, it's in your impact on others. The meeting evolved into an impromptu celebration of what we'd built together. People shared stories of how the company's transformation had changed their lives, not just professionally, but personally. Later that evening, as I packed up my reusable containers and prepared to head home in my trusty Toyota, Lauren stopped by my office one last time. You know what's funny? She said, sitting in her usual chair. Sterling offered me everything I thought I wanted 6 months ago, but they can't offer me what I have here, the chance to be part of something authentic. I smiled, remembering Uncle Glenn's words about money being just a tool. Sometimes the best things in life come in simple packages, I said, holding up my well-worn lunch container. Lauren laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. Who would have thought, she mused, that the guy I mocked for his $30,000 salary would end up teaching me the true meaning of worth. As we walked out together, the office humming with renewed purpose, I couldn't help but think that this was exactly what Uncle Glenn had envisioned when he left me the inheritance. Not just a change in leadership, but a revolution in how we value each other. Sterling Communications could offer bigger salaries, but they couldn't buy what we'd built here. A culture where worth was measured by character, not compensation. And that, more than any amount of money, was the real victory. 1 year to the day after the Morton's dinner, where Lauren had mocked my $30,000 salary, I stood in the lobby of our transformed office building, watching the morning bustle with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The space had changed dramatically, not just in its physical appearance, but in its energy. Gone was the competitive tension that once filled the air. Instead, employees from all departments greeted each other warmly, sharing ideas over coffee. In the collaborative spaces we'd created, the designer coffee cups and status symbols had been replaced by reusable containers, many sporting inspirational quotes about worth and value. Quite a change, isn't it? Lauren's voice came from beside me. She was dressed in practical business attire, her tablet displaying the latest employee engagement program results. Sometimes I walk in here and can hardly believe it's the same place. She wasn't just talking about the office. Lauren herself had become a case study in transformation. The woman who once measured people's worth by their salary now led workshops on authentic leadership and inclusive workplace culture. Her program had become so successful that other companies were asking to implement it, not through high-priced consultants, but through genuine collaboration and shared learning. Remember that night at Morton's? I asked, though of course she did. How could either of us forget? God, yes, she laughed, but it was a self-aware laugh, touched with humility. You know, I was so sure I had life figured out back then. Salary equals worth, status equals success. I was such a fool. We walked together through the office, passing Aubrey, who was training a new maintenance team member, not just in cleaning protocols, but in our integrated facility management system she'd helped develop. Her cancer was in remission, and she'd become one of our most valued leaders, showing everyone that wisdom could be found in unexpected places. Elizabeth waved from the marketing department, where she was brainstorming with a diverse team that included everyone from senior designers to interns. The hierarchical barriers that once divided our workplace had dissolved, replaced by a culture of collaborative innovation. You know what's ironic? Lauren mused as we passed the break room where Liam was demonstrating our zero-waste initiative to visitors from another company. We're actually more profitable now than when we were all competing to prove our worth through spending. She was right. Our company had become a model of sustainable success, proving that conscious capitalism could coexist with impressive returns. The profit-sharing program meant everyone benefited from our growth, creating a sense of genuine investment in our collective success. Uncle Glenn would have loved this, I said, pausing by my old IT desk, which we'd preserved as a reminder of where our journey began. He always said that money was just a tool. It's how you use it that matters. Looking around at what we'd built, I could see his wisdom everywhere. The $8.5 million inheritance hadn't just changed the power structure. It had catalyzed a complete reimagining of what workplace success could look like. As we headed toward the conference room for our annual review meeting, I noticed my reflection in the window. I was still wearing one of my regular dress shirts, still carrying my worn briefcase. Some things hadn't changed, and didn't need to. The meeting room was packed with employees from all levels of the company. Tom from HR was sharing impressive statistics about workplace satisfaction and retention. Our response to Sterling Communications' poaching attempt had become legendary in the industry, a testament to building culture that money couldn't buy. I have an announcement, Lauren said when it was her turn to speak. The Employee Engagement Program has been featured in Harvard Business Review. They're calling it a revolution in workplace culture. She paused, smiling, but the real revolution happened in here. She tapped her chest, in how we see each other and ourselves. As the meeting wrapped up, I shared one final piece of news. We were expanding our profit-sharing program to include educational benefits for employees' families and increased healthcare coverage. The room erupted in applause, but it wasn't just about the benefits. It was about what they represented. Later, that evening, as I packed up my familiar reusable containers and prepared to head home in my trusty Toyota, I found a note on my desk. It was from Lauren. Thank you for teaching me that the true measure of worth isn't in a paycheck, but in the lives we touch and the changes we inspire. My designer lunch containers were just expensive boxes, but your sad, reusable ones held real wisdom. Walking through the parking lot, I passed several employees carpooling home together, others chatting about tomorrow's projects. My old Toyota didn't look out of place anymore. It looked like what it was, a reliable tool that served its purpose well. Uncle Glenn's photo smiled down from my office wall, his wisdom now woven into the fabric of our company culture. The inheritance he'd left me had done more than expose Lauren's salary-based snobbery. It had created a space where worth was measured by character, success by impact, and value by how you lifted others up. As I drove home that evening, I couldn't help but smile at how far we'd come. The 30K nobody hadn't just become the boss. He'd become a catalyst for change, proving that true worth can't be measured in dollars and cents. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.